Thanks so much for the introduction, Alex. I am Kenny Aycock from the FDA. I'm Pras Pathmanathan's colleague. We're in the same Center for Devices and Radiological Health at our Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories. And as mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about the reporting of computational modeling studies and medical device submissions guidance. So just to recap thus far, on Friday, we heard from the team with ASME regarding the VNV40 standard that was published in final form in 2018. And that that standard plus the presentations really, covered a lot of foundational principles related to VVUQ of physics-based modeling. I talked about some terminology specific to credibility assessment, like model risk assessment, context of use, question of interest, and some details on VVUQ principles. On Monday, Pras presented the new Assessing the Credibility of Computational Modeling and Simulation of Medical Device Submissions guidance on the right on the slide here. That was published in final form just this fall. So that is fresh off our agency's publication plate. And this talk is a little different. We're sort of out of chronological order, going to take a step back a decade. This guidance was first published in draft form in 2014, so we have just crossed the 10-year anniversary of the material. But I want to emphasize that the recommendations remain relevant and useful, and really part of the purpose of this talk is not so much to rehash the past, but rather to provide context for why these two companion documents exist, how they're useful. I think if you're from industry, this will be, and you might submit to the FDA, you can consider how these documents may guide your pathway from cradle to grave, from initiating a device project, planning your credibility assessment, and to finally reporting results. If you are a regulator, maybe this can help in comparing and contrasting regulations, considering aspects you like and you may want to adopt, or aspects that you want to diverge. And if you're coming from academia, I think the awareness will be helpful. So with that, I just want to also acknowledge, again, I joined the agency in 2016. I've been very involved in physics-based modeling projects here. We have some end-to-end example projects using the VNV40 guidance, involved in a lot of working groups with VNV40 since I joined in 2016. So I've been kind of neck deep in the VVUQ space for a little over 10 years between here and prior research studies. But I cannot claim any credit for developing the reporting guidance. This is something that happened before my time, of course, and I just really want to acknowledge all the great contributors from our office in OSL now and in the past, as well as the regulatory colleagues. This was a big team effort, and there are several subject matter appendices that cover different specific scientific specialties, and there were contributions from all over the agency, from the different health offices, to cover the different types of products, provide examples and specific recommendations for those. So again, big thanks to everyone. I think you heard so others that were involved here. I think Brent, Craven, Pras were involved in both guidance documents, and also, of course, Tina, you heard from a little bit yesterday, was involved in all of these things and really led the initiation of the VNV40 efforts and coordinating, collaborating, facilitating all that. So with that, I'll jump in. We're going to cover both guidances to some degree. No disclosures, but I'll go to the outline now. First, we'll compare and contrast the 2023 credibility guidance that was just released a few months ago with the, again, 2016 reporting guidance. Then we'll review the body of the document. It's only 7 pages. It is a quick read if you just read the body, but we'll step through everything there in some detail. We'll briefly look at the subject matter appendices. This is a lot more content, so we won't dwell on details there, but want to raise awareness that this is a resource there that's available to you. If you are in a specific medical device subspecialty, then some subject matter appendices will be more relevant to you than others. And finally, just kind of as a segue to our Q&A session, cover a few frequently asked questions to hopefully spur some additional thought and discussion. I am once again coming to you from the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, one of 7 centers at our agency. Here, just want to emphasize that these guidance documents are also affiliated with our center. And so the recommendations are specific to devices, and although they may, similar principles may apply to drugs, biologics, and other areas, this is specifically guidance documents for our center, not intended to be applied to those centers. They may have their own guidance or recommendations. Looking at the timeline, again, to recap, we are out a little bit out of chronological order. You heard about the VMD 40 standard and the credibility guidance, and now we're going back to the 2016 era reporting guidance. So I'll jump into comparing and contrasting these 2 documents. On the following slides, we're going to keep this pattern where on the left, we will have the reporting guidance pinned there, the title, and here we're showing the outline of the document. And then on the right, we're going to have the credibility document as we kind of funnel through the different rows of the table of contents. So there are 2 primary guidance documents from our center that address computational modeling, physics-based computational modeling specifically. The first, again, you've heard a few times now. This is 7 pages of body material plus 5 subject matter appendices for 48 pages total. The credibility guidance is shown here with its outline, and this document, in contrast, has 35 pages of body content and 2 short appendices. So there's a lot more meat here in the credibility document discussing terminology and introducing the credibility evidence categories that Pros reviewed yesterday. Looking at this graphically, again, there's kind of an inverse of content. So a little bit of body content and these large appendices covering specific subspecialties for the reporting guidance. Both guidance documents do comment on reporting, and I think this can generate a little bit of confusion that we want to clarify. So the reporting guidance is solely dedicated to reporting of computational modeling details and results. As you can see, the outline, it's right there in the title. The credibility assessment guidance, in contrast, addresses reporting sort of as a tangent. It's an appendix to the very last section of the document where we get into some detail and recommendations on reporting your credibility assessment process, either your plans or your results for the credibility assessment specifically. And we'll go into more detail on this. So the output, if you want to think of each of these documents as kind of a machine with an input and an output, the output of the reporting guidance document is a simulation study report. And the output of the credibility assessment guidance is either a credibility plan if you're in the early phases before executing credibility activities, or a credibility report if you've already executed your credibility activities, the validation studies, the uncertainty quantification exercises. And in terms of the percentage of content covering reporting, the reporting guidance, again, spends far greater amount of time talking about reporting. There is some credibility evidence content, and that's for historical reasons. Again, this guidance document came first. It includes some commentary on verification and validation, but it's just there as a section holder saying you should, provide some evidence. Whereas for the assessing credibility guidance document, this is the sole focus for the most part. 90% of the content is on how to assess credibility and report it. Now let's take a closer look at the scope. Each document does have a scope section. I won't read all the details here. A few highlights to review if you come back. But just to summarize in a sentence, the reporting guidance document focuses on addressing what was modeled and how, along with your study results, whereas the credibility document focuses on why the model can be trusted, really providing that collection of evidence to support that you can rely on predictions from a computational model to make some kind of risk assessment and risk-based decision. So another thing we're going to do as we pin each of these documents, the left and right, is collect keywords. And then we're going to distill those at the end to kind of bring everything home. So on the left now we have, again, what was modeled and how it was modeled. And on the right, the scope is more about trust and the predictive capability of the model, which we term as credibility. Now let's look at the Appendix 2 of the new guidance, which again addresses reporting specifically of credibility aspects. A couple quotes. The outline here does not provide a recommended format for information pertaining to the model itself. So we tried to clarify and make this more obvious that, we're not asking for a duplicate report of the contents of, the description of the model in its entirety. That is rather addressed by the reporting guidance. So let's park model details on the left with our keywords. And another clarifying comment is that the outline does not provide recommendations for providing the results of a simulation study. That's another aspect not addressed in V&V 40, not addressed in the credibility guidance so much. Those are all focused on everything before you run your context of use simulations for the most part, really building the trust and credibility through your verification, validation, uncertainty quantification, and other activities for credibility. But the results of the study are best presented in your simulation study report. That is again on the left. One more comment here is we have a recommended outline for the credibility report. It includes the following 10 sections shown here. And there is one section that is a little bit overlaps somewhat with the reporting guidance, which is description of the computational model. There's a reason for this. We'll just explain in a minute. So two things. First, we state that if model details are included elsewhere in the regulatory submission, we recommend cross-referencing. So cross-referencing is appropriate if you are at the end of your pre-market submission phase where you're sending FDA your IDE or your 510K or your PMA. Likely you may have both reports done and you would have cross-referencing to avoid redundancy. You don't need to generate any more pages than are necessary to report the details. So this recommends that if you already have your details captured elsewhere in your modeling, your simulation study report, that you can cross-reference. The second comment is, though, that there may be scenarios, especially early phase of your project, where it makes sense to just have the credibility plan in isolation, where you would describe in brief detail the simulation, what you plan to simulate, the planned governing equations, et cetera, in summary form. And maybe you don't have any need for a simulation study report at that time. So if you're in the Q submission phase that dealing with a pre-submission with FDA, then you may use this section and just, instead of cross-referencing, provide summary details. So now we can either provide model details if it's a early phase credibility plan, or cross-reference the model details to the simulation study report. And then again, we recommend if you've already collected your evidence, we recommend 2 reports. And there are a few sections where cross-referencing would also make sense, including those more related to credibility. So if you have both reports, then the report for your simulation study is likely to benefit from cross-referencing from code verification, system discretization, calculation, verification, and validation sections of that report can cross-reference to the credibility report. That'll become more clear on a graphical image here in a minute. Okay, so let's now park the credibility guidance and look back at the reporting guidance and its specific recommendations. We had specific comments about the reporting guidance in the new guidance, of course, because it came later. So we don't have any mention of the credibility guidance in the 2016 era document. but we're going to look at a couple of specific details and again, emphasize where cross-referencing may be appropriate. So here's the outline broken out, blown up. It includes these recommended 15 sections. You'll notice in the body here discusses the model description. Everything else is front and back matter. And then there are these sections that discuss what was modeled, how it was modeled, the model details, and the results. Once again, the study results, the actual context of use simulation predictions are reported here, not necessarily reported elsewhere. So this is the best place to summarize the kind of conclusions of your modeling study. There are these highlighted sections that are relevant to credibility, as mentioned, and these are, again, areas where the new guidance recommends that you can cross-reference to reduce redundancy. So those can be parked over here. Primarily, if you have both documents, you recommend presenting the VVUQ evidence and other credibility evidence in that credibility plan or credibility report, excuse me. All right, so now we have all these keywords. We've gone through a lot of the content of the documents. We're going to collect everything together in sort of a modified Venn diagram. And so on the left, we have the simulation study report generated from the first guidance. And this will cover what you modeled, how you modeled it, details of your implementation, and the actual context of use simulation model predictions and results of your study. The credibility assessment plan or report instead is focused on trust. This is kind of like Exhibit A in your submission to support why can we trust these simulation predictions. It's the evidence that supports using this as valid data to support safety or effectiveness, or whatever your question of interest may address. It provides credibility plans and the credibility evidence itself, including verification, validation, and uncertainty quantification activities, but also, as you saw Pross summarize, we have those 8 credibility categories that encompass potentially other sources of evidence, like calibration evidence or emergent model behavior, other sources that support why we can trust predictions from your simulation for its particular intended application and context of use. The aspects that are in common between the two are the front and back matter. That's pretty boilerplate for all submissions to FDA, all reports. We have some commonality. The description of the model is proposed to potentially be covered in both. And then, as mentioned, there is this redundancy of code and calculation, verification, and validation, where both documents address these topics, partially because of historical reasons, once again. But the new guidance recommends optionally cross-referencing when appropriate. So you can reference the model description from the simulation study reports. That does not need to be repeated in full detail. And then the aspects relevant to credibility can be cross-referenced to the credibility assessment report. So that covers the guidance documents. They're comparing and contrasting those. If you have any questions, please jot those down. We can review in the end. Now I'm going to do more of a review of the body of the reporting guidance. This is still heavily used. Of course, it remains relevant. There's nothing that's really displaced by the new guidance documents. So it's helpful to understand the recommendations that are there, and we're going to highlight a couple of key comments for what FDA would like to see when you report your computational modeling studies. Once again, we have the outline here, and we're going to step through. In the introduction, a key thing to highlight here is that the purpose of the document is to provide recommendations for formatting, organization, and contents. And in the scope, we state, this is kind of an interesting sentence in the middle here, for computational modeling and simulation studies to serve as valid scientific evidence in regulatory submissions, we need specific details. This is, again, part of transparency, but also part of just to be able to really understand the the capabilities, the limitations, the potential areas where the model may not be as strong and predictive. It's helpful to have specific details on your computational model. People reviewing the models often have significant background in that specific area of computational modeling. So the high level is important, but also the granular details are relevant. We also recommend the following headings, which gone over a little bit. There's 15 sections. So the first is an executive report summary. This is, again, sort of a boilerplate recommendation for all reports submitted to FDA, but we specifically mention a couple of terms that you will recognize from the VNV 40 talk: context of use, quantity of interest. We don't have question of interest here, but we do mention quantities of interest. It's important to summarize. And then we want to have the scope of your modeling summarized, state the type of analysis, whether it's related to electromagnetics, fluid dynamics, heat transfer, something else, conclusions based on the context of use, which again would only live here because this is where the results are reported, but this is in the summary, and then some keywords. Background introduction. Again, this is kind of a boilerplate front matter thing, but just encourage describing the system and the device itself and its use environment, as well as the context of use of your analysis. And then for the following 7 or 8 sections here, we follow a consistent pattern. If you read the document, it makes it very easy to quickly skim through and follow the contents. So introduce a specific topic related to the model, recommended details that should be provided, and then also recommended disclosure of assumptions, simplifications, and rationale, especially the rationale that is important. There's a lot of common language in the document stating you should describe and provide rationale for assumptions and simplifications that you use. So that is very important to us to understand, again, both the limitations, but also where they apply, where they don't apply, and how it may impact the conclusions of your study. Won't go into detail on code verification other than to say that, again, that it's recommended that if you have both documents in a submission that you would cross-reference. System configuration is unique to this document. This is where you get into more specific granular details about what you modeled. You cover the computational domain, describe the components of the system. You describe the methods for generating your geometry, whether it was an imaging study or if it's based on the nominal dimensions from CAD in manufacturing your device. Perhaps you have some kind of post-manufacturing measurements that inform your computational model. This is where you get into those details to make sure it's representative of your final finished device, and then describe the software used for generating the geometric configuration. Governing equations, we have a specific section on governing equations and constitutive laws and encourage those be stated. This helps both us understand what you're modeling and potential strengths and limitations of that chosen form of the equations. So having the conservation equations and the constitutive laws all spelled out is very helpful. And we recommend providing the actual equations if appropriate. System properties, this is where you get into your material properties or other parameters in the model. These may be biological, chemical, physical, physiological. And it's also recommended here to discuss the anticipated variability. The words uncertainty quantification aren't really used here, but this is sort of just at a high level getting into what parameters are anticipated to be variable or not variable. System conditions covers, this is where you have your initial and boundary conditions addressed, and potentially other constraints that control the system. We recommend providing graphical representation, something like a diagram to illustrate how you're imposing your loads or your other boundary conditions, heat source, or whatever it may be that is driving your simulation. Discretization. This is really focused on how you discretize your model, not necessarily on the mesh refinement aspects, but We encourage providing an image, an actual, qualitative look at your mesh discretization. This helps provide some sanity check that the regions of interest are appropriately resolved. And talking about the type and quality of discretization is also relevant. And then we do recommend reporting the criteria used to assess whether the discretization was sufficient. But again, that kind of starts to go into the aspects related to calculation verification covered in the new guidance. So those aspects could again be cross-referenced. Numerical implementation just covers the what methods, numerical methods were used, state solver parameters, convergence criteria, and again, recommend rationale for those settings. It's fine to use default settings in some cases, but it's important. We want to hear, that was considered and that you have some rationale or evidence to support that it is appropriate. Validation is again one of these sections that overlaps. It may be appropriate to cross-reference. And then just covering these last few sections very quickly. The results section, once again, address the quantities of interest predicted for your context of use simulations. Provide tables, graphical summaries. This is where this should be the predictions from your simulation that provides the evidence supporting your ultimate conclusion. And this, following this guidance, that would usually be some kind of regulatory related conclusion, like the device being safe for a particular condition or a particular model being worst case and appropriate for further bench analysis. We have recommended discussion and to discuss the regulatory or clinical relevance, again, getting to how those results now connect to how the evidence will support the submission. Summarize the limitations and certain sensitivity and uncertainty analyses are mentioned here, but again, it was not the focus of the document, and that could be another potential area for cross-referencing if appropriate. And then finally, in the conclusion, perhaps most importantly, just addressing the regulatory objective. We did not have question of interest spelled out at the time of this document being written, but that's kind of what this would be addressing, how that question was answered and what the implications are of the final evidence generated. And finally, it closes on a glossary. So this provides some helpful descriptions of terminology. I'd also encourage you, though, in looking at other glossaries from both VNV 40 and the VVUQ 1 standard that was published more recently in 2022. And then we have terminology also identified in the new credibility guidance as mentioned here on the slide. Okay, so that we literally covered every page of the 7-page document. I hope it wasn't too dry, but now you're very familiar. If you went and sat down and read it again, I think you would be able to have that pretty well locked in. So we're not going to go over the subject matter appendices in great detail. I just, again, want to raise your awareness that these are around and they may be relevant to your particular field. Here are the 5. They are a few pages each. And each does follow this 15-section outline. So basically, we present the recommended outline for the report, and then we present for each of these subject matter appendices some additional comments relevant to this specific area of modeling. The first subject matter appendix is dedicated to computational fluid dynamics and mass transport. It does refer to a few other supporting documents that may be useful, especially VNV 20 that was FDA recognized into this in 2022. So if this is your area of interest, this subject matter appendix may provide more relevant and additional useful information for you. There is a subject matter appendix on solid mechanics. This is very relevant to implants, fatigue-prone devices, metallic implants, etc. And this also references VNV 10 that covers like VNV-20, a lot more detail in how to perform VVUQ activities specifically. And that is also FDA recognized as of a couple of years ago. The third appendix covers computational electromagnetics and optics. References a relevant IEEE standard. And then the last two cover computational ultrasound and computational heat transfer. So we, again, kind of zipped through those 38 pages without detail, but I wanted to let you know that resource was available. So this really concludes the meat of the talk here. I just have one more slide on frequently asked questions to prime you all for Q&A. The first is as follows. Say you want to submit a credibility assessment plan to FDA for feedback. This is something we recommend in the new guidance, but you do not yet have model results. And your question is, do I need to submit a separate simulation study report following the reporting guidance? So I alluded to this in the talk already, but each of these guidance documents may be used in isolation depending on the stage you are in your product lifecycle. If you are early stage, it probably does make sense to just use the new credibility guidance document and focus on generating a credibility assessment plan. And that plan could live in isolation, providing just summary details on your model that could then be submitted for FDA feedback. So refer to the appendix 2 of the guidance. I think that will be relatively clear in practice, but it may be something you need to be pointed to find it. Second question, say you are developing a device that relies on physics-based simulation as part of its intended use. So Pras also mentioned some of these devices that may have the device itself may include physics-based simulation, or the entire device may be a simulation, like, for example, diagnostic devices that take in patient data and predict some kind of diagnostic quantity. So in this case, there are no study results per se. The study results are attached to individual patients during clinical use of the device. And the question is, what guidance documents are relevant? We do explicitly call out this scenario in the new guidance document, referring to simulation in a device or a device being a simulation based. So that guidance document remains relevant. The reporting guidance is a little bit more tricky to apply because there is no results. Once again, the discussion's a little different, but you may want to use it for reporting the specific details of your model, the numerical implementation, and constitutive models and governing equations, et cetera. But again, the credibility guidance does specifically address this, and we still recommend, of course, that you provide evidence to show that your simulations are credible when they're influencing your device operation. Third question, say you're using some commercial code where you don't have necessarily a full peek under the hood to see all the governing equations. What should you report? Here, we ask you to do your best. This is a great opportunity to collaborate with software vendors. We've had great success doing so and trying to understand particular details of models, but we ask that you report the details that are available. And this may also be, it's one aspect of several tens or hundreds in the full process. So we understand there's some difficulties. Fourth, say your submission relies on results produced with hybrid modeling. This is a really hot, potentially increasingly hot topic, using both physics-based modeling and AI or machine learning. How do you report details for hybrid models? Right now, our answer is please come to FDA if you're planning to rely on hybrid modeling for generating evidence in a submission, or if your device itself will rely on hybrid models to in its operation, whether that's in some kind of closed loop physiological system, or if it's a device that relies on hybrid modeling for predicting diagnostic measures. We ask that you please interact with us early on. That would really be helpful. The guidance documents we've covered are specifically scoped to addressing models that are primarily physics-based. There is, of course, a lot of in the physics-based modeling aspects, a lot of the principles or all of the principles will still apply, but the overall credibility assessment will be a little bit different and potentially complicated by using both AI, ML, and physics-based modeling together. So this is an evolving area, and we look forward to advancing here and hopefully harmonizing and having better guidance in the future. So thank you all for your attention and for attending today. I want to acknowledge the other members of the Credibility of Computational Modeling program here, Brent Craven and Pras, who I work closely with. Again, we heard from Pras yesterday, and this is the team for finalizing the credibility guidance that you heard about. There are many others, once again, from both OSL and from our sibling office here in the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality that have reviews day-to-day submissions. This was definitely a joint effort for both the FDA guidance documents, and a lot of folks from both arms also participate in the VNV-40 committees. So big thanks to all of them. Now I'll be happy to take any questions. Alex, I'm going to pop open the chat here to see what has come in so far, but that is my last slide.
Super. Thanks so much, Ken. Kenya, there's quite a few questions in the Q&A and some comments as well. So we'll take them one in one, and then there's a few colleagues that have asked as well that, whether they were happy to be to join a sort of a pause once we close your session, a bit of a panel to start doing a bit of foresight, what comes next, what we should be thinking as a community. But let's first finalize this bit. So there is a question from John Rice. It says, is there a need for a collaborative across disciplines development of a formal living taxonomy of model types in which physics-based might be one in order for other modeling and simulation application domains to benefit from each other's best practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I fully appreciate all the nuance there, but I think definitely, especially as we see AI/ML pick up and modeling be used in tandem, both numerical physics-based modeling along with maybe more first principles, simpler models that are not PDEs, ODE models, or just other types of statistical models, data-driven models, and then the fully complex machine learning AI models. Having some kind of taxonomy could be helpful, and I think especially there's a lot of credibility principles that apply. I think there's been some desire to use the foundation of VNV-40 for other areas, both other outside medical devices, but also outside physics-based models. The risk-informed process seems pretty universally applicable. It's kind of common sense codified, right? Like, you want to have more evidence when there's more risk involved, and the details in some aspects don't transfer. There's been some activity in VVUQ 70, which is dedicated to AI/ML, if you're interested, where they were trying to apply principles to AI/ML, but some things don't necessarily cross over, such as code verification. There are no governing equations for data-driven models, AI/ML models. Typically, there's a set of parameters in and a set of something out. So I think that more attention to understanding what foundational principles apply universally. I think validation usually almost always will apply to any model. But there are other aspects that don't cross over, like the training data. That's much more relevant to AI/ML. It could be relevant to physics-based models if they're heavily calibrated, but then there are other considerations there as well. So don't think I addressed the question directly, but hopefully that discussion is helpful and we can continue the discussion on.